The silence after the divorce was not just the absence of another voice in the room, it was the absence of life itself. Nights dragged into one another like a slow punishment, heavy with the sound of nothing. The bed that once carried warmth became a cold stretch of emptiness. The walls seemed to breathe loneliness back into the air, and even the smallest things, the untouched wine glasses, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the hollow echo of footsteps on the wooden floor became reminders that the life once imagined had died long before the papers were signed. There were nights when the body begged for touch, not even for passion at first, but for the simple weight of another beside it. An arm across the chest, a heartbeat close enough to lean into, a warmth to shield against the cold ache that settled deep within. But those nights ended the same way they began, with the sheets twisted around nothing but longing. The skin forgot what it felt like to be traced. The lips forgot the rush of being kissed. The eyes forgot how it felt to be looked at with desire instead of indifference. What hurt most was not even the betrayal that came before the end, but the slow erosion of hope. There was once a belief that love could mend all wounds, that time could restore broken things. But time only widened the cracks, turning soft touches into absent gestures, whispers into silence, promises into lies. When it finally ended, it felt less like a clean break and more like the slow drowning of a soul. By the time the door closed behind him for the last time, the heart had already grown numb. In the months that followed, there was no hunger for love. The thought of it felt like a cruel joke, a word too sweet for the bitterness it left behind. Love became something for others, for those untouched by betrayal, for those lucky enough not to know what it felt like to be discarded after giving everything. The body carried on, the face learned to smile in front of others, but the nights always betrayed the truth. Behind the closed door, where no one could see, loneliness became a second skin. There were moments of rebellion, fleeting thoughts of escape, buying new dresses that never left the closet, standing too long in front of the mirror, wondering if beauty had already slipped away. Watching couples in cafes, tracing the outlines of their joy with tired eyes. Sometimes the ache turned into anger, anger at wasted years, at promises broken, at the way passion had been extinguished long before the vows were. Other times it was just emptiness, a numb acceptance that the best years had already been lived and lost. The heart whispered cruel truths in the quiet. No one will touch this body again. No one will look at it with hunger. No one will love it with fire. It became easier to accept solitude than to risk believing again. Safer to bury desire than to let it rise only to be crushed once more. There is a kind of grief in this that is worse than death. It is the grief of being alive while feeling unseen, untouched, unloved. Even the memories of intimacy grew dim. The way fingers once tangled in hair, the weight of a hand on the back, the soft press of lips at midnight, they all became blurred shadows. At times the body would betray its resolve, stirring awake in the dark, aching for closeness that would never come. But the mind was quick to crush it, reminding again and again, love is gone, passion is gone, desire is gone, the nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of life happening outside, the distant laughter of neighbors, the rhythm of cars on the street, the hum of rain against the windows. Each sound carried a reminder that the world moved on, that joy existed somewhere, but not here, not anymore. There were days when strength returned, when independence felt like freedom rather than punishment. But the truth always returned in the dark, pressing against the chest, tightening around the throat. The silence was not peace, it was prison, and the heart, though bruised and tired, still longed for something it swore it no longer wanted. What no one tells is how easily loneliness begins to feel like destiny, how quickly the mind convinces itself that this is all there is, that the story has ended, that passion was a dream that belonged to another lifetime. Days turned into years, and the vow to never love again became less of a promise and more of a shield, one built not out of strength but of fear. Yet deep inside, beneath the numbness, there was still a faint flicker, a fragile part that refused to fully die, though it hid in the shadows, waiting. The heart tried to silence it, to smother it under grief and disappointment, but it lived on, however faintly. And so the silence stretched on, a life lived in half, light, untouched and unseen, until the night when everything changed with a single knock at the door. It was an ordinary evening, the kind that blurred into all the others. The kind where the clock ticked too loudly, the shadows stretched across empty rooms, and silence wrapped itself around every corner like a shroud. The television hummed in the background, not because of interest, but because it was easier than listening to the weight of nothing. The glass of wine sat half, finished on the table, untouched long enough for condensation to fade. That night was supposed to be like every other, predictable, quiet, and suffocating. Then came the knock. At first, it startled like a sound out of place in a world where no one came unannounced anymore. For a moment, the instinct was to ignore it. Doors no longer opened to surprises, only to bills, deliveries, or mistakes. But the knock came again, steady and unhurried, and something in it carried warmth rather than intrusion. Opening the door felt like breaking a spell, and there he was, not expected, not imagined, not part of the plan that had been drawn around solitude. His eyes held something that stirred discomfort and familiarity all at once, curiosity, kindness, and an intensity that unsettled the silence that had become home. His smile was not bold, not demanding, but alive in a way that shook something buried for too long. A simple smile, yet it reached his eyes, lit them with a fire that seemed too young, too unafraid. The conversation that followed should have been small, meaningless, the kind of exchange that ends quickly. Yet words lingered between them, stretching minutes into something else entirely. It was in the way he leaned slightly forward when he spoke, as if every answer mattered. It was in the way his gaze didn't slide past, but rested with weight, as though seeing not just the face, but the fractures behind it. That gaze was unsettling. It broke through the practiced walls, the carefully hidden truth of loneliness. It made the heart race in a way it hadn't in years, confused by its own reaction. He was younger, that was undeniable. His presence carried a brightness that contrasted the heavy quiet that filled the home. And yet there was no arrogance in him, no sense of superiority, only warmth, curiosity, and something harder to name. It was not pity. No, his eyes didn't carry that. It was something sharper, something that awakened a forgotten ache. The evening stretched, conversation flowing easier than it should have. Laughter slipped out, unguarded, almost startling in its sound. The glass of wine was finally finished, poured into another, then another, until the room was lighter, warmer, filled with the sound of voices instead of silence. The body remembered things it had buried. The flush of cheeks, the subtle awareness of being looked at for too long, the strange heat that crept into the air when space between two people narrowed. Desire did not come rushing in. It tiptoed, teasing at the edges, whispering reminders of what it felt like to be seen, to be noticed, to be wanted. Every detail became sharper. The way his hand brushed lightly against the table as he leaned in, the roughness in his voice when he laughed, the way his eyes lingered as though memorizing. It was almost unbearable, the collision of past emptiness with this sudden flood of presence. The heart tried to fight it, whispering warnings, too young, too reckless, too dangerous, yet the body leaned closer, betraying every denial. The mind replayed the knock over and over, realizing how thin the line had been between another lifeless night and this sudden awakening. Time passed differently that night. The world outside faded, the rain against the window, the hum of the television, the usual reminders of solitude, all gone. What remained was the heat between two people sitting closer than they should, speaking words they should not, and feeling something neither expected. When he finally stood to leave, the silence returned, but it was not the same silence. It pulsed with something unspoken, something waiting. His goodbye was simple, his smile soft, his hand lingering a second longer than necessary against the doorframe. And then he was gone, leaving the air heavy with everything unsaid. The door closed, but the heart stayed open, racing with a confusion that felt like hope, fear, and hunger all at once. That night, the bed was still empty, but it no longer felt the same. The sheets held the memory of his presence, the mind replayed his gaze, and the silence hummed not with despair, but with possibility. That single knock had split the darkness wide open, and there was no turning back. It began so softly, I almost didn't notice it. A glance held a moment too long, a smile that lingered between words, the brush of his arm against mine that sent a warmth rippling through skin long forgotten. What should have been harmless, innocent even, grew heavier with each passing hour we spent together. At first, it was laughter, easy, careless, the kind that shakes the body and loosens the heart. But laughter has a way of opening doors, of breaking down walls that had been built high and strong. And through those cracks, something dangerous slipped in. It was in the way he looked, unafraid and unashamed, as though seeing every flaw and refusing to turn away. His eyes didn't avoid the lines time had drawn, didn't falter at the scars of years lived and lost. Instead, they lingered with a hunger that both terrified and awakened me. There was no pretending under that gaze, no safety in denial. Every glance stripped me of the lie I had been clinging to. That desire was dead, that passion was gone, that I was finished being seen as a woman worth wanting. One evening, his hand brushed mine, not deliberately, not demanding, just a touch that could have been an accident. But it wasn't. I felt it in the way his fingers lingered for a second longer than necessary, in the way my body lit up from the simple contact. That small spark spread like fire, consuming years of silence and emptiness. It shocked me how quickly my body remembered, how quickly the hunger returned, not just to be held, but to be desired, to be wanted in the most intimate, unrestrained way. It scared me. The laughter that once felt light began to carry an undertone of longing. Every word spoken seemed to bring us closer to something unspoken. I found myself leaning toward him, my voice softer, my smile lingering. His presence filled the room with a tension I couldn't deny. Even the air between us felt alive, charged, as if waiting for one of us to break the fragile boundary. The night it happened, the silence was thick with possibility. We were close, too close, our knees brushing as though drawn by some invisible force. He looked at me, not with hesitation, but with a fire that told me he wanted more than just conversation. My breath caught, my heart raced, and for the first time in years, I felt alive, not simply surviving, but burning. When his hand finally reached for mine, there was no turning back. The warmth of his skin against mine spread through me, a rush of heat and memory, of longing and release. I didn't think I couldn't think. My body leaned toward him, pulled by a force stronger than fear, stronger than shame. When his lips touched mine, the world fell away. It was not gentle at first. It was hungry, desperate, as though we had both been waiting too long for this. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands trembled as they reached for him, needing to feel, to confirm that this was real. His kiss was both fire and comfort, both a demand and a promise, and in that moment, every wall I had built came crashing down. Desire surged through me like a storm, fierce and undeniable. It was shocking, terrifying even, to realize how much had been buried, how much I still wanted, how much I still needed. His hands traced paths over my skin, and every touch lit sparks that spread deep inside. I felt younger, not in age, but in spirit, as though life had been poured back into veins that had grown cold. The years of silence, of emptiness, dissolved under the heat of his embrace. I had sworn passion was gone, but here it was, alive and relentless, flooding back into a body that had almost forgotten how to respond. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered breath reminded me of something I had tried to bury. That desire doesn't die, it only waits. What struck me most was not just the physical hunger, but the way he gave himself to the moment without hesitation. Younger, braver, unafraid to love fully, unafraid to want without apology. There was no fear in his touch, no second guessing in his eyes. He wanted me, not despite everything, but because of it, and that truth broke something open inside me that I didn't know was still alive. I let go that night, surrendered to a passion I thought I had lost forever. And in his arms, I discovered a part of myself I thought had died. The shocking return of desire was not just in the body. It was in the soul, in the heart, in the way I remembered what it felt like to be fully alive. And when the night faded into morning, I knew nothing could ever be the same again. It felt dangerous from the very beginning, as though every touch carried a risk, every glance whispered a warning. There was a voice inside insisting it should not happen, that the lines had already been drawn, that crossing them would bring nothing but regret. Yet there was another voice, softer but stronger, that said it was already too late. The body had already betrayed the mind, the heart had already opened, and desire had already taken root where loneliness once lived. The first time passion truly unfolded between us, it came like a storm that had been gathering for far too long. His lips on mine erased the years of silence and the promises I had once clung to. His hands held me with a certainty that dissolved the doubts I thought would always keep me prisoner. There was no hesitation in him, no fear of the difference in years, no thought of what the world might say. Only the raw, unfiltered truth of wanting me, here now completely. Every breath, every touch carried both fire and tenderness. His body pressed against mine, young and strong, and yet there was more than hunger in him. There was reverence. It shook me how he could look at me as though I were something sacred, even in the heat of desire. I had been touched before, but never like this. Never as though each curve, each line, each scar was something to be cherished. In his arms, I was not too old, not forgotten, not broken. I was alive, wanted, and whole. The danger of it made it intoxicating. Knowing how forbidden it was only heightened the intensity. Every kiss felt like stolen fire, every whispered word like a secret carved into the night. It should have been shame, but it wasn't. It was liberation, the kind that strips away years of fear and replaces it with truth. For the first time in so long, I wasn't living in memory or regret. I was living in the now, breathing, feeling, surrendering without apology. The passion between us was not reckless, even when it burned hot. It was healing, filling spaces inside me I thought would always remain empty. With every touch, the weight of betrayal began to fade. With every kiss, the sting of abandonment softened. His presence, his certainty, his unafraid love wrapped around me until I no longer felt like a woman who had been discarded. I felt like a woman reborn. There were moments when fear tried to creep in. Lying with him, tangled in warmth, I would wonder if it was only temporary, if the world would tear us apart, if time itself would laugh at the audacity of what we had found. But then he would whisper my name, trace my skin with hands that knew only honesty, and the fear melted away. His youth did not make me feel old. It made me feel timeless. His boldness did not make me feel reckless. It made me feel alive. The nights together blurred the lines between body and soul. The passion was undeniable, but it was more than flesh. It was the way he listened, the way he saw me, the way he touched parts of me no one else had ever reached, not just my skin, but the deepest parts of my being. Desire had returned, but it carried with it something greater, connection. A connection that went beyond rules, beyond expectations, beyond everything I thought I knew about love. It was healing to give in, to stop fighting the pull that had been there from the first glance, the first smile, the first unexpected knock at the door. Healing to surrender without fear, to allow myself to be wanted without question. Healing to admit that passion was not gone, that love was not dead, that I was not finished. The forbidden nature of it gave it weight, but the healing truth of it gave it wings. And somewhere between danger and freedom, between brokenness and rebirth, I discovered the kind of deep love I never thought I would feel again. In his arms, I found both fire and peace, and for the first time in years, I no longer feared the future. I only lived in the miracle of now. Thank you for listening to this journey of love, longing, and rediscovery. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more stories that awaken what you thought was gone forever. Like, share, and let these words remind you that passion and connection have no age, no boundaries, only truth. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love that heals, even when it feels forbidden.